When a young woman ages out of the system, she inherits a worthless forge from the family she never knew. But what she discovers hidden inside is a truth that will force her to choose between a safe escape and a dangerous fight for justice. If you've ever felt like your past was a mystery, or that you were starting over with nothing, hit that subscribe button because this story is for you. The day I turned 18 wasn't marked by a cake or a party. It was marked by a signature. My name, Elara Vance, scrawled on a series of beige forms that officially released the state of Oregon from any further responsibility for my existence. The pen felt heavy, like it was weighted with the 12 years I'd spent in the system, a ghost drifting through 6 different foster homes and 2 group facilities. The social worker, Ms. Albright, gave me a tight, professional smile. It was the same smile she'd used for every difficult conversation, a thin shield against emotion. You have your final check, your bus pass, and the address for the transitional housing unit, she said, ticking items off a mental list. And this. She pushed a thick manila envelope across the polished table. It had a law firm's insignia in the corner, embossed and severe. It was sent to the department years ago, with instructions to be given to you on your 18th birthday. It's regarding your grandfather's estate. I stared at the envelope. Grandfather. The word was a hollow space in my memory. I had a vague, dreamlike image of a man with hands covered in soot, the smell of coal smoke and hot metal, but it was a memory so faint it could have been from a movie. After my parents' car went off the cliffside road into the churning gray waters of the Columbia River, there was just the system. No grandparents, no aunts, no uncles, just a rotating cast of strangers paid to keep me alive. My grandfather? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I thought I didn't have any family left. He passed away about a year after your parents, Elara. It was all very complicated. The state was your legal guardian. His will was modest. The lawyers will explain. She stood up, a clear signal that our time was up. The appointment was over. My childhood was over. I walked out of that sterile office into the damp Portland air, the envelope a strange, alien weight in my backpack. For 12 years I had been a ward of the state. Now I was just a ward of my own uncertainty. The transitional housing was a single room with a shared bathroom down the hall. It was clean, anonymous, and smelled of disinfectant. It felt exactly like every other room I'd ever been assigned. I sat on the edge of the thin mattress, the springs groaning in protest, and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a letter from a law firm in a town I'd never heard of, Havenwood. It was a formal, stilted invitation to a meeting to discuss the final dispensation of the estate of one Alistair Vance, my grandfather. The letter was dated a decade ago. They had been waiting all this time. A strange mix of anger and curiosity churned in my gut. Why was this the first I was hearing of it? Why did no one ever mention him? The bus ride to Havenwood was a slow bleed from gray cityscapes into the deep, wet green of the Oregon countryside. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the endless stands of Douglas firs into a watercolor painting. I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach with every mile that passed. What was I even doing? I had $212 to my name. I was chasing a ghost into a town I didn't know, to claim an inheritance that was probably just a pile of debt. The lawyer's office was on the town's main street, a small, tidy brick building tucked between a hardware store and a diner. The man who greeted me was named Mr. Davies. He was older, with kind, tired eyes, and a suit that was a little too big for his frame. He didn't offer a tight, professional smile. He offered me a cup of coffee, which I accepted gratefully. Elara, he said, his voice gentle. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I knew your grandfather. Not well, but I knew him. He was a quiet man, kept to himself. He opened a file on his desk, the papers inside yellowed and soft at the edges. Alistair didn't leave much. I want to be very clear about that from the outset. He had some significant debts when he passed. medical bills, property taxes. The estate is, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a summary of assets and liabilities. The assets column had one entry: rural property, 2.5 acres, with structures. The value next to it was estimated at a few $1,000s, barely enough to cover the auction fees. The liabilities column was a long list of debts that added up to nearly 3 times that amount. The main structure is a small cottage, which I'm told is in a state of serious disrepair. There's also an old forge on the property. He was a blacksmith, you see. The county assessor valued the forge itself at $10. For the scrap metal, I presume. $10. A laugh, dry and bitter, almost escaped my lips. After all these years, this was it. A worthless piece of land and a $10 pile of scrap. The state has a lien on the property for the back taxes, Mr. Davies continued, his tone apologetic. The simplest course of action, and the one I must professionally recommend, is for you to renounce the inheritance. You sign this form, the county takes the land, the debts are cleared, and you walk away free and clear. No strings attached. He pushed another form toward me. Renounce. The word echoed in the quiet room. It felt like a final severing. To give up the only thing, the only physical piece of my history I had ever been offered. It was the sensible thing to do. The logical thing. The thing Ms. Albright would have advised. But as I looked at the pen in my hand, I thought about the ghost memory of soot-stained hands and the smell of hot steel. I thought about the 12 years of being unattached to anything, of having no place that was mine. I want to see it, I said, the words surprising me as much as they seemed to surprise him. Before I sign anything, I want to see the land. The forge. Mr. Davies blinked. Elara, there's nothing there for you. It's remote, overgrown. The cottage isn't habitable. It would be a difficult and, frankly, pointless trip. His concern felt genuine, which was a novelty. But it didn't change my mind. I have a bus pass, I said, my voice gaining a sliver of confidence. I can get there. Please, I just need to see it. He studied my face for a long moment, his gaze searching for something. I don't know what he found, but he finally let out a long sigh and nodded, pulling a folded, hand-drawn map from the file. Alistair drew this for me once, he said, sliding it across the desk. The property is about 3 miles out of town. Follow the old logging road. You can't miss it. The forge is made of river stone. It's the last thing you'd expect to see fall down. He gave me the keys, a single, rust-pitted iron key on a loop of twine. The cottage is locked. The forge, well, the forge has no door. The walk was longer than I expected. The pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to a muddy track swallowed by ferns and salal bushes. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and decay. It was a lonely, forgotten road. Part of me, the practical part that had survived 12 years in the system, was screaming that this was a mistake. I should be back in Portland, filling out job applications, securing my spot in the transitional housing program, being sensible. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, felt a strange sense of rightness. Of walking towards something that mattered. I saw the cottage first. It was worse than Mr. Davies had described. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back, and the porch had collapsed into a heap of splintered wood. Windows were shattered, and moss grew in thick, velvety patches up the siding. It was a house that had given up. But then I saw the other building, set back from the cottage, nearer to the creek that bordered the property. It was exactly as the lawyer had said. Made of dark, rounded river stones, mortared together with a skill that had defied the years. It was square and solid, with a chimney that rose straight and true against the gray sky. A gaping, doorless archway led into the darkness within. This was the forge. This was the $10 inheritance. I stepped through the archway, out of the rain and into the cool, still air inside. The smell hit me immediately, not of damp and rot like the cottage, but of something ancient. Cold ashes, iron dust, a faint, lingering echo of smoke. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. In the center of the dirt floor was the forge itself, a massive brick hearth connected to a leather bellows the size of a small boat. The leather was cracked and stiff, but it was still there. An anvil, scarred and pitted from a lifetime of work, sat on a huge oak stump. Tools I couldn't name hung in rusted rows on the stone walls. Tongs of every shape and size, hammers with heads like fists, chisels and punches and drifts. Dust lay thick on everything, a soft gray blanket over a sleeping giant. This place hadn't just been abandoned, it had been left. As if the person working here had simply put down his hammer one afternoon and walked away, expecting to return the next morning. It felt sacred. I ran my hand over the cold, unyielding surface of the anvil. I could almost feel the vibrations of 1,000 hammer blows, a history of fire and force and creation. This was my grandfather's world. This was the only thing of him that was left. I spent hours in there, just touching things, breathing in the unique air of the place. I felt a connection I couldn't explain, a sense of belonging that the sterile rooms of my childhood had never offered. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the doorway, my foot kicked something on the floor near the bellows. It wasn't a rock, it was a loose flagstone. Curiosity, a powerful and undeniable force, took over. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the cold dirt, and worked my fingers into the crack. The stone was heavy, but it shifted. I lifted it away, revealing a small dark cavity in the earth beneath. And inside that cavity, nestled in a bed of dry moss, was a metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, painted black, with a heavy latch on the front. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a small, intricate puzzle lock, a series of rotating rings with symbols etched into them. My heart started to pound, a heavy, frantic drum against my ribs. This was no accident. This was hidden. This was left for someone to find. I lifted the box out. It was heavier than it looked. I sat on the floor, the box in my lap, and studied the lock. The symbols weren't letters or numbers. They were small, stylized icons. A hammer, a flame, a star, a river, and a leaf. It felt like a riddle from a fairy tale. I tried to think. What would the combination be? A birthday? A special date? I knew nothing about my grandfather. I had no dates, no names, nothing. I traced the symbols with my finger. Hammer. Flame. The tools of his trade. Star. River. Leaf. The world around him, the nature he lived in. I thought about the way the forge was built, solid and enduring. The way the tools were hung, with purpose and care. This was a man who thought in patterns, in processes. A blacksmith doesn't just bang on metal, he follows a sequence. Fire to heat, hammer to shape, water to temper. I looked at the symbols again. Flame. Hammer. River. Fire. Hammer. Water. I lined up the flame symbol, then the hammer, then the one that looked like a winding river. I pulled on the latch. Nothing. I felt a surge of frustration. It was hopeless. I was about to give up, to just take the box to Mr. Davies and let him deal with it, when my eyes fell on the anvil again. It wasn't just a block of steel. It had a maker's mark stamped into its side, a small, intricate design I hadn't noticed before. I crept closer, brushing away the dust. It was a leaf, an oak leaf, surrounded by 5 stars. A leaf and 5 stars. His personal signature, his mark. I went back to the box. Leaf, star. The other symbols must be part of the sequence, too. What was the process? You take the raw material, leaf, nature, you apply the craft, hammer, you bring it to the fire, flame, you guide it by the heavens, star, and you quench it in the water, river. I dialed in the new combination, leaf, hammer, flame, star, river. I held my breath and pulled the latch. This time, it clicked. A loud, definitive sound that echoed in the silent forge. The lid was stiff, sealed shut by time and damp, but I pried it open with trembling fingers. The inside of the box was lined with oilcloth, and the contents were perfectly preserved. There was no money, no jewelry. There were just letters. Dozens of them, tied in bundles with twine. The top bundle had my name on it, written in a strong, steady script, Ilara. My hands shook as I untied the twine. The paper was thick and creamy, the ink a faded blue-black. I unfolded the first page and began to read. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, then you are 18 and you have found your way home. I am sorry I could not be there to greet you. I am sorry for so much. There are things you need to know, things no one else could tell you. The story of what happened to your parents, to our family, is not the one you were told." I stopped reading, my breath catching in my throat. The official story was simple, tragic, and neat. A slippery road, a sharp turn, a terrible accident. It was the story that had defined my entire life, the clean, sharp cut that had severed me from my own history. But this letter, this voice from the grave, was telling me that story was a lie. I had to sit down on the cold floor of the forge, the stone pressing into my spine, the heavy box in my lap. The last rays of daylight were failing, and the shadows were growing long and deep, but I didn't care. I had to know. I read on, the words of my grandfather pulling me back into a past I never knew I had. He wrote about my mother, his daughter, how she was full of life and laughter, how she loved the forest and the river. He wrote about my father, a good man who worked with his hands, who fell in love with my mother the moment he saw her. They were happy here, in this small cottage, on this piece of land that had been in our family for generations. And then the letters turned darker. My grandfather, Alistair, was not just a simple blacksmith. He was an artist. His metalwork, intricate gates and sculptures inspired by the natural world, was sought after by wealthy collectors. He had made a good living, and he had invested it wisely, not in stocks, but in land. He had quietly bought up parcels all around Havenwood, old logging tracts, and forgotten homesteads. He believed in the land. He believed it was the only real thing a person could own. But someone else believed that too. A company, a development corporation from out of state, had come to the valley. They saw the same thing he did, not beauty, but resources. Timber, water rights, and, as they discovered through geological surveys, a rich deposit of rare earth minerals running right through the heart of the valley, directly under our land. They started buying up property, pressuring locals, offering deals that seemed too good to be true. But my grandfather refused to sell. This land was his family's legacy. It was my mother's home. It was meant to be my home. The company, a faceless entity called North Valley Resources, didn't take no for an answer. The letters described a campaign of intimidation, fences cut, tools stolen, threats whispered in town. My father, trying to protect his family, stood with my grandfather. He started documenting everything, taking pictures, making notes, talking to other landowners who were being pushed out. He was building a case against them. And that, my grandfather wrote, was why they were killed. It wasn't an accident. The brakes on their car had been cut. The local sheriff, a man on the company's payroll, had ruled it an accident without a proper investigation. The case was closed before it was ever truly opened. My grandfather's world shattered. He lost his daughter, his son-in-law, and he almost lost me. The company knew about my father's evidence, and they came for it. They ransacked the cottage, looking for his notes. But my father had been clever. He had hidden everything. I sat there in the deepening dark, the letter shaking in my hand. The air in the forge felt thick, heavy with the weight of this revelation. My parents hadn't been victims of a tragic accident. They had been murdered. And the system, the same system that was supposed to protect me, had covered it up. The grief I had carried my whole life, a quiet, numb ache, was suddenly transformed into something sharp and hot. rage. Rage for the parents I never got to know, for the grandfather who had to bear this horror alone, for the life that was stolen from me. I pulled out the next bundle of letters. They were written over the course of the next year, the last year of my grandfather's life. He wrote about his despair, his fear for me. He knew the company was watching him. He knew they wouldn't stop until they had the land and had buried the truth for good. So he made a plan, a desperate, brilliant plan. He couldn't go to the police. He couldn't trust anyone in the county, so he decided to fight them with the only weapons he had left: time, patience, and the appearance of defeat. He started to let the property go. He stopped maintaining the cottage. He sold his valuable tools, replacing them with junk. He let the fields go wild. He spread rumors in town that he was broke, that he was sick, that he had lost his mind with grief. He manufactured debts, taking out loans he didn't need and then defaulting on them, creating a paper trail of insolvency. He made his entire life, his entire legacy, look worthless. He was building a fortress of poverty around me, a shield of neglect. He knew that after he was gone, the state would take custody of me, and the company would think they had won. They would see a worthless, debt-ridden property and a helpless orphan. They would assume the evidence was lost forever. They would move on, wait for the state to auction the land, and then buy it for pennies on the dollar. But he had hidden it all. Not just the letters, but my father's evidence. In the final letter of that bundle, he told me where. "The heart of a forge is not the fire," he wrote. "It is the anvil. It endures. It is the foundation upon which everything is shaped. Look to the foundation, Alara." I scrambled over to the anvil, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran my hands over the massive oak stump it rested on. It seemed solid, ancient, immovable. But then my fingers found it, a thin, almost invisible seam in the wood on the side facing away from the door. I pushed, and a section of the stump swung inward on a hidden hinge my grandfather must have forged himself. Inside the hollowed-out stump was another metal box, smaller than the first. This one was unlocked. I lifted the lid. It was filled with my father's life. There were photographs of cut fences and strange tire tracks. There were notebooks filled with dates, names, and license plate numbers. There was a sworn, notarized affidavit from a former employee of North Valley Resources, a man who had quit in disgust, detailing the company's tactics. And at the very bottom, there was a small cassette tape. A note wrapped around it in my grandfather's script read, "He confessed. I made him." I didn't know who he was, but I knew this was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon my father and grandfather had left for me. I sank back onto the floor, the two open boxes before me like a sacred offering. The weight of it all was crushing. 12 years of my life had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion to keep me safe. My grandfather hadn't abandoned me. He had sacrificed everything, his reputation, his legacy, his final years, to protect me and to preserve this truth. He had trusted that one day I would be old enough and strong enough to find it. The question was, what was I supposed to do now? The anger was still there, a burning coal in my chest, but underneath it, a cold wave of fear was starting to creep in. These people had killed my parents. They had silenced an entire town. What could I, an 18-year-old with no money, no power, and no one in the world, possibly do against a company like that? The sensible thing, the safe thing, would be to take these boxes and disappear. Walk away. Let the past stay buried. The company would get the land, and I would get to live. It was the same choice Mr. Davies had offered me in his office, just with higher stakes. Walk away free and clear, no strings attached. Or I could stay. I could fight. I could use what my grandfather had given me to try and get some measure of justice for my family. It was a terrifying thought, a lonely, impossible fight against a powerful, ruthless enemy. I felt small and utterly alone in the vast, dark forge. I sat there for what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the sound of the rain and my own ragged breathing. I cried. I cried for the little girl who lost her parents. I cried for the teenager who drifted through a cold and faceless system. I cried for the grandfather who died alone, carrying a burden no one should have to bear. And when the tears finally stopped, a strange sort of calm settled over me. I looked around the forge, at the solid stone walls, at the tools hanging patiently on their hooks, at the great, enduring anvil. This place wasn't just a building. It was a testament to my grandfather's strength. It was the last thing he had built, not of iron and steel, but of love and sacrifice. To walk away from it would be to let him down, to let my parents down. It would be to agree that their lives, their fight, meant nothing. My phone, which I'd thought was dead, suddenly buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. The screen glowed in the darkness. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a Seattle area code. I hesitated, then answered, my voice hoarse. "Hello? Is this Alara Vance?" A man's voice asked. It was smooth, professional, and had an undercurrent of impatience. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent North Valley Resources. It has come to our attention that you are the heir to the Alistair Vance property." My blood ran cold. They knew. They were already watching me. "How did you get my number?" "We have our ways," he said dismissively. "Listen, Ms. Vance, I'll be direct. The property is a worthless, toxic asset tied up in liens and back taxes. It's a liability you don't need. We are, however, prepared to make you a generous offer to take it off your hands. We'll pay off all the estate's debts and give you $20,000, cash. You sign the deed over to us, and you can walk away and start a new life." $20,000. To me, it was a fortune. It was a ticket out. A new start, a safe start, anywhere I wanted to go. It was the easiest choice in the world. All I had to do was say yes. All I had to do was betray everything my family had died for. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You want to buy my land?" "We want to help you out of a difficult situation, Ms. Vance," he corrected smoothly. "It's a win-win." I looked at the boxes on the floor, at the evidence of his company's crimes. I thought of my grandfather's sacrifice. "The land isn't for sale," I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The silence was heavy, menacing. "I think you should reconsider," Thorne said, his voice losing its professional sheen and taking on a hard, threatening edge. "People who stand in the way of progress in that valley often find themselves having accidents. It would be a shame for history to repeat itself." The line went dead. The threat hung in the air, as real and as cold as the iron tools on the wall. He had just confirmed everything. He had just handed me the last piece of resolve I needed. Fear was a fire, and my grandfather had taught me how to use it. You heat the metal, you hammer it, you shape it into something strong, something useful, something that can't be broken. I spent the night in the ruined cottage, not sleeping, but guarding my inheritance. I found an old quilt in a cedar chest that had survived the damp, and I wrapped myself in it, sitting by the window and watching the moon through the shattered pane. The house groaned and settled around me, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a ruin. It felt like home. It felt like it was protecting me. The next morning, I walked the 3 miles back into town, the 2 metal boxes heavy in a canvas sack slung over my shoulder. I didn't go to the bus station. I went straight to Mr. Davies's office. He was already there, a light on in his window against the morning mist. He looked up, surprised as I walked in. "Alara, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Did you decide to sign the papers?" "No," I said, walking to his desk and heaving the sack onto it. The boxes landed with a heavy, metallic thud. I'm not signing anything. I want to hire you." He stared at the boxes, then at me. "Hire me for what?" "To get justice for my parents," I said. I opened the boxes and I told him everything. I laid out the letters, the notebooks, the photographs. I told him about the phone call from Marcus Thorne. I watched his kind, tired face shift from confusion to shock, then to a slow-burning anger that mirrored my own. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time, just looking at the evidence spread across his desk. "Alistair," he murmured, shaking his head. "That clever, stubborn old man. He played the long game." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp and focused. The tired lawyer was gone, replaced by someone else, someone with a fire in his gaze. "They made a mistake, Ilara," he said, his voice low and firm. "They underestimated your grandfather, and now they are underestimating you. Yes, I'll take the case." That was the beginning of the fight. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle like in the movies. It was slow, grinding work. It was motions and depositions and injunctions. Mr. Davies was brilliant. He didn't go to the local authorities. He took the evidence straight to the State Attorney General's office and the Environmental Protection Agency. He used my father's meticulous notes to file a massive civil suit against North Valley Resources, citing a pattern of racketeering and intimidation. The cassette tape was the key. It was a recording of my grandfather confronting the man who had cut the brakes on my parents' car, a local mechanic who had been deep in debt to the company. On the tape, terrified and guilt-ridden, the man confessed everything. Faced with that and the mountain of other evidence, the company's defenses began to crumble. They tried to intimidate me again, of course. Strange cars would park on the road outside my property. Mr. Davies received threatening calls. But it was different now. I wasn't alone anymore. Some of the older folks in town, people who had known and respected my grandfather, started to come around. A woman who ran the diner would save a hot meal for me at the end of the day. The man at the hardware store showed me how to patch the cottage roof, refusing to take any money for the supplies. They had been scared for a long time, but seeing me, Alistair Vance's granddaughter, standing up to the company that had bullied them for years, gave them a sliver of courage. They started talking to Mr. Davies, adding their own stories to the case. The company, facing a massive public scandal and a criminal investigation, finally folded. They settled the lawsuit out of court. They didn't admit guilt, they never do, but the terms were damning. They were forced to divest from all their holdings in the valley. They paid a significant sum into a trust for the environmental restoration of the area. And they paid a settlement to the estate of my parents. It wasn't about the money. I used most of it to pay Mr. Davies and to set up a legal fund to help other rural communities fight predatory developers. But it was justice. It was an acknowledgement. It was the truth, finally dragged out into the light. Now, a year later, I am still here. I live in the cottage, which is no longer a ruin. With the help of my new neighbors, I've made it whole again. The roof is sound, the windows are new, and there's a fire burning in the hearth. But my heart is in the forge. I've spent the last few months cleaning it, restoring it. I found my grandfather's old books, his sketches and notes on the art of blacksmithing. I cleaned the rust from his tools. I repaired the ancient leather of the bellows. A few weeks ago, for the first time, I lit the forge. I watched the coals glow, felt the heat on my face, and I picked up a hammer. My first attempts were clumsy, ugly things, but with every swing, I felt more connected to him, to this place, to the strength he left for me. I'm not a blacksmith yet. I'm an apprentice, but I'm learning. I am shaping my own future, on my own terms, on the land my family fought and died for. The other day, I was working, the rhythmic sound of the hammer on steel echoing through the valley, when Mr. Davies stopped by. He brought me a copy of the local paper. The headline read, "Havenwood Valley Protected from Development, Designated as State Trust Land." We stood there for a moment, watching the smoke rise from the forge's chimney into the clear blue sky. He would be proud of you, Alara, he said quietly. I know, I said, and for the first time, I truly believed it. I looked from the forge to the cottage, to the green hills rolling away into the distance. This was my inheritance. Not the $10 valuation in a lawyer's file, but the strength in these stone walls, the truth in my father's notebooks, the love in my grandfather's letters. It was the legacy of resilience, the responsibility of memory, and the priceless gift of a second chance. It was a home. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. This story isn't just about a forge or a legal battle. It's about the fact that sometimes the things that look the most broken or worthless are the things that hold the most value. It's about finding your own strength in the legacy of people who loved you, even if they're no longer here. So many of us are handed stories about our pasts that are incomplete or just plain wrong. We're told we come from nothing, that we should walk away from difficult histories. But sometimes, going back, digging into the dirt and the dust, is the only way to find out who we really are. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Or have you ever had to fight for something that everyone else told you to abandon? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe that in sharing our experiences, we help each other feel a little less alone in our fights. This community is built for people who understand that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful destinations. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining us. We're all just trying to find our way home. Thank you for being a part of my journey today.